Hey there, I'm a little surprised you're back. I'll try to explain a little more in this video. Having the column be super rigid is important. I looked around for large box tubing or something to get me started. I didn't have any luck finding anything suitable, so I had to build one from scratch. I'm using a 1/4-inch thick plate for the sides and the back, and I'm using 1/4-inch bar stock for the smaller parts. It's hard to see, but I clamped a surface plate to the smaller front sections, just trying to get them in the same plane. Here I'm maximizing my clampiness to try and prevent warp and distortion from the welding. These rails are made for 5mm screws. I actually drilled and tapped them to hold 4mm screws. Allows for some wiggle room to get the rails parallel. This large eye bolt will allow me to move the column around. Here I'm lining up a motor at the top to drive the Z-ball screw. It's much easier to drill and tap the holes now. Once the column is filled with epoxy granite, drilling and tapping would be much more difficult. This up watertight is important. This epoxy tends to try and find holes to leak out. Here I'm using a wooden form to allow me to overfill the column with epoxy granite. This way the column rests completely on resin. Reducing the metal-to-metal contact will hopefully reduce vibration and harmonics. This large column up took several batches. tacking it down to get it into all the tight spaces. By the time this column is filled, it will weigh over 400 pounds. Bolts are there to allow me to bolt it to the frame. My intent was to place large washers and nuts into the epoxy. Theory was good, execution was poor, as I ended up losing a couple nuts. Here I'm just packing some finer epoxy and sand at the end for a smooth surface. My efforts to prevent warping failed miserably. I started out with a dip of almost 100 thou on one rail. I read about this guy on the interwebs who stretched some really thin gauge wire across his rails and poured epoxy over them. Since the wires were almost perfectly straight, all you had to do was scrape down or sand to the wire and he had flat rails. Happened to be the same cheap epoxy I was using for granite. That was a mistake. The other one is not connecting the sides together. Low viscosity epoxy will make sure that it self-levels. Good torching removes bubbles on the surface. The screws were there to plug the holes to keep epoxy out, but the epoxy created raised areas around the screws. I tried to plane them smooth, but was afraid of taking too much. A simple spade bit did the job fine. Like I said, I ended up with 2 smaller pneumatic cylinders. Because of math, the 2 cylinders will give me 2 pounds of support for every 1 pound of air pressure. By my estimate, the head will be about 200 pounds. 100 psi should make the stepper motor's life a lot easier. I am making use of lubrication ports in the linear bearings in the ball nut. This manifold from overseas has adjustment valves to help direct the flow of lubrication. Squeezing in a glass scale encoder in between other things. It's starting to get pretty tight on space. This little bracket will hold a precision micro switch for the home position. My luck with other switches has been anywhere from plus or minus 1 thou to almost 10 thou. I wanted something with higher precision. 2 10,000ths should suffice. because that's the resolution of the encoders anyway. A few more tasks to finish up, creating attachments for the bellows to keep chips out. Even though I have a home switch, it doesn't have room for over travel, and it's only at the top, so a pair of regular switches will be there to prevent crashes. Last thing to fit in, a track to hold cables and keep them neatly out of the way. Time to test out the pneumatic cylinders. First, I need to void a warranty.
Like butter.